Thank you, Ben. That was a bit of a mouthful, and I'm now realising I probably should have given you the short bio. Hi, everyone. It's awesome to be here, and of course, a big thank you to the South Australian Committee and the broader AWA. These things are not easy to pull together, and we have an awesome day lined up, so really excited. I'd like to begin, of course, by extending on the acknowledgement of the traditional owners of this land in the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank Robert for what was a really moving and fantastic introduction to the day. I think what Robert reiterated for us is the deep connection that water has to country, the environment, culture and people, and the importance of the interaction and relationship to that. And I think we, as young water professionals in the water sector, are really inheriting a space that is only beginning to understand and come to terms with what it means to empower traditional owners to have determination and definition over their lands. And that's something that hopefully today, and as we continue throughout the course of our careers, we can begin to think about and begin to work on and continue to develop. I'm hoping to perhaps pick up today where Carmen and Corinne have left off in sharing with you a little bit about my story and where I've come from. And I wanted to start at age 13, 14, somewhere around there. And as all good hormonal teenagers do, I was hanging out at my cooler and slightly older uncle's house, rifling my greasy fingers all over his things, learning about the world. And he came up to me and said, "Oh, I've got a prop." He came up and he said, "Hey, Paul, check this out," and handed me this record. Is anyone familiar with this? A couple of people seeing some nods. Right on. The Sex Pistols' Never Mind the Bollocks. Limited edition, first pressing record. And I thought, okay, cool. So I put it on and heard this guy, 16-year-old Johnny Rotten, singing about God Save the Queen, the fascist regime, anarchy for the UK. And I thought, cool. That's awesome. And from then on, I was going to be Johnny Rotten. There was not a single shirt in my wardrobe that wasn't without a tear, a safety pin stuck through it, an anarchy symbol, drawn on in permanent marker. Mum and Dad were sort of sitting back a bit perplexed. Mum sort of going, "I think we need to buy him some new shirts." And Dad going, "No, honey, I think he likes it that way." And then came school-free dress day in year 8. Now, of course, you're probably familiar with the school-free dress day. You bring $1 and you put your identity on the line. And you can imagine as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old growing up in semi-rural Victoria on the coast, attending a state school, a free dress day was a bit of a terrorising prospect for a young Johnny Rotten. I got on the bus and my friends went, "Dude, you're dead." And at recess, we used to stand on this hill, right? And on one side of the hill, year 10 boys. On the other side of the hill, year 10 girls, right? And the way those boys expressed their hormonal interest in the girls on the other side of the hill was basically just to hurl apples at us in the middle of the hill. So I thought, well, today could be a day for a bit of a battering. I think I've got a target on my back here with my safety pinned white shirt and my pinstripe pants with zips all over them. But I would soon find that the opposite was the outcome. At recess, one of the year 10 guys spotted me, got up and came over. We were sort of sitting on this hill going, "Hey, he's coming over." Play cool. Came over, walked up to me and said, "Hey dude, cool shirt. Have you heard about my band, Carsnick Death? You should come check us out." And handed me this flyer. shakingly, I thought, cool, okay. And I went. And it scared the crap out of me. So I remember, Mum dropping us out the front and sitting there, beep, beep, goodbye, darling. And me and a couple of friends sort of begrudgingly like, all right, see you later. And we went in and went down these stairs, and I remember getting closer to the entry, and the closer we got, the louder this sort of swirling, primal sort of drone was underway. We walked through the front door, and in the middle of the room, there was this band playing. You couldn't really hear what they were playing. It was just like, and around that, just an audience, no stage, just an audience all around them, much like this picture, jumping off guitar amplifiers, grabbing microphones and yelling, and going crazy in this space and in this moment. And for me, while frightening, I came out of that having found my people. I remember walking out and, my white shirt covered in sweat and brown with like a red cordial stain down the side of it, missing a shoe, and Mum sort of looking at me at the front like, oh God, what have we done? And me just being like, yeah. And as I went again and again and again, I would quickly realise that this chaos that I was experiencing, this sort of deep maelstrom of connection, was not an accident. In fact, it was the outcome of a broader set of values and expectations and practices as part of a cultural ethos that was to be DIY. To be DIY meant that you would do it yourself. And in the punk community, that meant a lot more than what it does at Bunnings Warehouse if you're to go and do a home reno. It meant that you would see something you wanted and you would have a go at it. It didn't matter if you didn't have the expertise. If you wanted to be in a band, start a band. If you wanted to be in a record label, start a record label. What it meant was that everyone could participate. Everyone was actively a part of the community. And what that did was create the expectation. So the audience were equally involved in the organising, the running, sometimes the policing of shows, and definitely the performing of shows. There was no stage deliberately. The band were the audience, and the audience were participating as the band. So that, for me, was a significant moment. And through my newfound punk community, growing up on the coast, it would permeate beyond, the noisy basement, and find its way to some of the other areas that I was keen on. At the time, growing up on the coast, a keen surfer, I came to learn of and actively participate in community-led movements that were really seeking to advocate for an end to industrial development, to things like ocean dumping and environmentally sensitive environments. And for me, this was really cool because I was like, whoa, this punk stuff works in the real world. Which is really what sort of led me to environmental management, environmental science, learning about the environment, and so sort of starting a path that has since looked different in many ways. It's looked like this through education and community engagement programs. It's looked like this through international development and water governance research. Sometimes it's looked like this, and sometimes, more recently than you might think, it's even looked a bit like this. Now, for the record, this is a 28-year-old Paul Satur on the far right of screen, having just completed a PhD with the answers. And all a PhD student needs after the end of their 3-year research is to sit down, with the chair of Melbourne's largest water authority, the State Minister for Water, and the Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Melbourne to change the world. Well, there was my opportunity. Unfortunately, in the cone of platypus silence. Now, the point to all this is I was invited along to share with you a bit of some of my insights into what led me to a career in the water sector. And I thought a bit about it and realised that I didn't choose a career in the water sector. Instead, what I chose are things that were closely aligned to my values for social equality, for environmental justice and conservation. And increasingly, continually, what I have found in the water sector is that the water as this commodity or resource that binds people and culture to place is a great enabler for these sorts of values. The thing that excites me as young water professionals at the beginning of a journey is that our water sector is now beginning to start to recognise this. This is a diagram taken from the Water Service Association report on next-gen urban water, where they talk about the future of the water sector. And they recognise that we have come from this very centralised servicing model based around efficient water supply and sewerage to now a model that is increasingly moving towards creating and fostering shared value for people, economies, environments. And recognising that in order to get there, we need to be thinking beyond the basic essential services of our organisation and to think about the outcomes of where we want to be and what we want to do. So as young water professionals, this is pretty exciting. The scene is set. There's an opportunity for us to take this and to reimagine it or to shape it how we like. At the same time, as young water professionals, we're going to be faced with some of the most significant challenges of our lifetime, some of which have never really been experienced to the extent they are now, or have been, and of course some of which we don't have the answers for at the moment. Climate change, population growth, health, the cost of growing infrastructure, these are some of the things that we will face and some of the things we need to think about. So while there is great opportunity, there is also significant challenge and much uncertainty associated with that. But we do have a place to start. Many of you will be familiar with these concepts of water-sensitive urban design and water-sensitive cities, these ideals of multifunctional infrastructure, things like car parks and basketball courts that serve a purpose for livability and at other times form part of our flood retention system, for example. So we're seeing, as a result of this pursuit of shared value, this diversification of services. And we know that for a diversification of services, it requires a diversification of our sector. Can I see a show of hands here? Who's an engineer? Nice, that's about 30%. Right. When I first came here and presented, the first question that popped up was, what can we do to make people like you feel more welcome? And I had no idea what that meant at the time, until I realised that everyone around me was a water engineer. I think what's really exciting about the AWA and our sector is we're seeing people from really diverse walks of life: education, environmental science, social sciences, accounting, graphic design, fine arts, being a part of this sector and diversifying the potential and the opportunity that we have to deliver value. And of course, as part of this diversification, there's this need for us to be more actively and more effectively engaging our community to build literacies, understanding and a stewardship of the sorts of services we deliver. If we think about the basketball court or the car park, there's a requirement for our community to have an understanding of the function that plays, so that on days of heavy rainfall, it can provide a water retention and conveyancing purpose. Currently, how is our water-sensitive citizenry looking? Well, at times, it looks a little bit like this. It's pretty common after a heavy rainfall in any town or city for, Channel 9 or WIN or, your news source to, provide a bit of a photo like this. Someone's driven under the bridge and the car's gone belly up. Now this, of course, is not necessarily reflective of a lack of care and apathy amongst our community. What we've come to realise in recent research is that the community's literacy and understanding of our water system, of its processes, of the way it functions, and the sorts of values that we know that it can deliver are fundamentally quite low across most cities. So, why is that the case? Well, again, it's not necessarily the product of a community that doesn't care. As I've told you already, there is a really rich connection to water and its value in space and culture. What we are seeing is a legacy of decentralised or centralised servicing solutions, one-size-fits-all approaches to water conveyance, and the emergence of this new decentralising, distributive approach to water technologies and water service delivery. But embedded in this is still the cultural and social expectation amongst our community that infrastructure will prevail. So much so that when things go wrong, when that infrastructure fails, things can go wrong pretty quickly. So this is quite a significant step away from this concept of a water-sensitive city with water-sensitive citizens. And in some instances is the legacy of the path we've come before us, where often centralised servicing overseen by technical experts are then flow onto this requirement for a community engagement, which is not necessarily the expertise of engineers. This is a harsh quote, and I should have left it out now knowing there's 95% of engineers in the room. Engineers, you guys are awesome. You play an amazing and important role. But what I'm saying is that our service delivery is decentralising. The technical dimensions are starting to become really exciting and innovative, but our social and cultural ways of bringing communities into that space or implementing technologies that are culturally and socially sensitive still require some work to go. And I'll give you an example. In 2016, I did some research looking at social inequality in Australian cities and the connection of that, the relationship of that to daily water use practices, and in particular, the experience of different communities during the Millennium Drought and how water played a role in upholding their livability and their resilience. And of course, within that space, you might recall a range of disincentive and incentivisation programs. Water bills went up, but you could get rainwater tanks. You weren't allowed to water your lawns in some cities. So trying to understand, well, how did this play out in different communities and in often quite socially affluent communities with high rates of education and high rates of water literacy. You can see here, as Claire talks about, there was a real strength and ability to cope and to prosper. A1 recycled drinking water in the household, rainwater tanks to save water. But this, of course, wasn't necessarily the experience held by all community members. There were others who had very little awareness of incentive programs for things like rainwater tanks and water-saving shower heads, a very limited understanding or capacity to afford them, to engage in them, to ensure maintenance. So you can see here this example of how engineers, like all of us with this fantastic water literacy, whether we mean to or not, developing programs that are designed to engage the community and engage our wider stakeholders based on the assumptions that they know what we know and they have the capacities that we have, which don't necessarily always play out in context as we had hoped. So, to wrap up, water, of course, as this great enabler for culture, for connecting people to environment and place, can play a really fundamental role in enriching the value of communities for resilience, for sustainability, for livability. And we as young water professionals are the active stewards of that system, of the way that functions, which means it's up to us in this reimagining of a water future to define how that system will deliver value. So I'd like to return momentarily to that basement, where for us, as the band with the tools and the expertise, have a stage set for us. But of course, we know as a band that we cannot play without our community, without our audience. Because without our audience, we're just practicing in a room. So I want to leave you with 3 things. The first, do it yourself. As young water professionals in a sector heading towards shared value with a focus on outcomes, there has never been a greater opportunity for you to define what this system looks like and the value you will create. And in that process, share that value, share that expertise. Find people, stakeholders, partnerships, networks, some of them in the room today, that share your vision. And don't worry if you don't have the answers, because nobody does yet. Secondly, don't work for organisations who don't value your input. If you can't see your input into the outcome, as a young person, if you're feeling like you're second or third in line, find somewhere else. Because think about it this way, we're going to hear over the next few days a whole lot of really exciting innovation, exciting processes that are happening in our water sector. We inherit all of them. So ask questions, have an input, and do it yourself. Secondly, get off the stage. And I can see Elise nodding her head furiously, and I can understand the irony of me standing up here. Get off the stage and be your audience. As stewards of a water sector, as stewards of shared value, promote stewardship. Recognise that it is not ours to go alone. There is a wider sector out there, and of course a wider network of community whose culture, whose context, whose lived experience matters in the success of that value. So share your expertise, create networks, build long-lasting and meaningful connections. And finally, while there is much, as I've said, opportunity, there's also a great deal of uncertainty with the complexity of our challenges that we lie ahead. So, to that, embrace that uncertainty and let your values guide you. Thanks very much.